Starship doing what he does, dropping absolute bangers. I've been developing software for a long time, so I wanted to jump on, watch this one through with you guys. 10 regrets of an experienced programmer and get a feel for what I do regret, don't regret, or maybe I haven't even realized I regret yet. So let's not waste any time, jump into it.
Recently, I volunteered my time at a hospice center for dying programmers, also known as X, and I asked the question, you're on your deathbed. A kid comes to your side and says, Grandpa, I want to learn how to code. What do you regret most about programming? My immediate answer would be something like, leave me alone, kid, and let me die in peace. But it's actually an interesting question because programming is not like most careers. It has billions of possible paths with many conflicting opinions and no single right way to do things. Despite its unpredictable nature, I found that there are some universal traps that nearly every developer regrets falling into. And in today's video, we're going to look at 10 of them. Regret number 1, I wish I would have written less code. It's extremely important to understand that code is not an asset, it's a liability. Every block of code is something that you'll have to maintain in the future and something that could break your application entirely. Beginners don't write a lot of code because they don't know how, but as they gain more experience, they start writing more code. Eventually, everybody realizes that less is more, and the total lines of code decrease while productivity increases. However, someday you may transcend to the genius level 10x engineer, at which point the lines of code you produce will go negative. I, for one, am not afraid to admit that I regret 99% of the code I've written. I distinctly remember feeling like a genius when I implemented my first abstraction factory singleton proxy decorator in JavaScript. However, a few years later, an angel came to me in a dream and said, bro, you could have just made that a regular function. An idiot admires complexity, a genius admires simplicity. And at that point I realized my entire life was a lie. Simplicity is always a good thing to strive for, but there's a lot of other trade-offs to consider, like readability, performance, maintainability, testability, reusability, and so on. In addition, what's the definition of simplicity? Is it about brevity or readability, or something else entirely? In my opinion, it all comes down to time. The goal is to minimize the amount of time anyone has to spend messing around with your garbage code. Regret number
All right. While I do agree, I definitely regret maybe is the wrong word. I definitely don't maybe even recognize like 90% of the code that I've written in the past, but sometimes that's for good reason. And I think we should never underestimate our past selves. Like sometimes when you come across other people's code or your own code from the past and you think, why the hell did I or did they do it like this? And it's easy to forget sometimes that there's context and, hindsight's 2020, but yeah, we shouldn't be underestimating ourselves. We do things for a reason. I've had it myself where I've gone to refactor old code and thought, I can do this in so much better way. Then you're constrained by maybe a system or an API or whatever it is. So we got to stay true. You got to keep learning. I don't necessarily agree that I regret writing lots of code. I get what he's trying to say, like the implementation. And I've talked about it in a previous video, like the implementation of design patterns or things that don't fit. Where they don't. That's just an approach problem. That's not a problem of writing loads of code. To be a good programmer, I believe you do have to write lots of code. You have to read lots of code, and you have to keep learning. You go on that trajectory and see where you get to. So yeah, I mean, that's just my take on it. I think you just got to keep doing you. Obviously, we do strive for the right level of abstraction over concrete implementation. It's just finding that balance, and I think that balance can differ per solution or per problem that you're approaching. So it's a good one though.
Number 2, I wish I would have learned to code earlier. When you're young, your brain is highly optimized for learning, but as you get old and crusty and your pineal gland is calcified by the fluoride in the water, your ability to learn becomes diminished. That's why most world-class musicians start at a very young age. Now, you can learn to play the piano or learn to code at any age. Hell, I learned how to play the triangle well into my 30s, but if you start learning how to code when you're 2 or 3 years old, you should easily be able to land a 6-figure job by the time you're 13. Now, most people won't admit it, but there's definitely ageism in tech. Employers will often prefer a younger programmer with a more malleable brain, and that's why the median age of programmers around the world is around 30. Obviously, starting young is great for a lot of things. I wish I would have bought Microsoft stock back in the 80s. The only problem is that I wasn't born yet. So if you want to learn how to code, the best time to start is in the womb, but the second best time is right now, because we're not getting any younger. Before we move on to the next one thing I don't regret is installing.
Absolutely. I think, I don't know if, I guess I started coding, messing around with code like in my teens. I don't know if like 14, 15-year-old me would have been in a good place enough to properly learn programming. I think I did it as early as I could, as soon as I was out of school, like that, or what's the right word, like required schooling in the UK, I was straight into doing software development. So I did it kind of as early as I could do. And it definitely paid me dividends in the early stages of my career. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's no time like the present. If you want to do it, it's something that's interested you, just be passionate about it. Otherwise you're wasting your time. Don't just do it for money, because you probably won't find a job. It's yeah, you got to do it because you want to do it. So if that is you, then get going.
In the Chrome plugin for data build. Most importantly, it's
skip
truly
this
an
ad
amazing community. And that brings us to regret number 3. I wish I would have finished more projects. This is what my side projects directory looks like. And of all these projects, I finished maybe 2 or 3 of them. Finishing a software project almost always takes way longer than you'll estimate. There's something called the 90-90 rule, where when you feel like you're 90% done with a project, you still have 90% to go. It's not like building a bridge where everything is laid out in a blueprint. With software, you'll almost always have all kinds of unexpected things come up. And if you're a solo developer, you might get distracted and just quit the project and start something entirely new from scratch. I've done that more times than I can count. In fact, I'm even considering not finishing this video. In retrospect though, I really regret not finishing those projects. I don't even want to think about all the hours flushed down the toilet with nothing to show for it. However, it's also important to be honest with yourself and recognize when your app sucks. As some projects just aren't worth finishing, and sometimes knowing when to cut your losses is even more important than finishing a project. Regret number 4. I wish I would have gotten a computer science degree. Going to college is not the...
I think there's a few things to that last one. Knowing when to stop for the right reasons, because there can be different reasons to knowing when to stop. And sometimes it can be more of an approach to the problem than a continuation of trying to achieve that problem, right? So like, if you don't finish a side project because the scope keeps growing and you haven't like set yourself proper boundaries around what an MVP is, what it is you're trying to learn, what is it you're either trying to learn or launch or build or whatever it is, like it's about thinking, why didn't I finish that? And what can I do differently next time to try and finish that? So stop having these regrets by doing something different. And I think if you set yourself like a realistic minimum viable product for the project that you're working on and get out the door, whether that's shipping it and committing the MVP to a Git repo, I mean, or launching it or whatever it is you're trying to achieve, you know, having those goals early on and not letting it spiral. I mean, we all know how it can spiral. It's not because the scope creeps because a client's put it on you. It's because maybe you think of a new thing you want to do and it's really exciting and it's about direction. And I think the more we can do to control our direction and be disciplined, then the more likely we're going to get a feel for like completing the project. Definitely.
The most efficient way to learn how to code. You'll learn far more in a real-world job or by building things on your own. And you don't need a degree to get a job even at big tech companies, but going to college and networking and doing internships is the most surefire way to get a high-paying job in tech at a young age. And there are many jobs out there that do require a degree, even though it's arguably pointless. What you don't want to do is get scammed like all these millennials who went to college for a useless degree like Egyptian studies, only to find out that there's no jobs in that field, so they go back to school to get a PhD in Egyptian studies to teach other kids Egyptian studies, creating a literal pyramid scheme. Speaking of pyramid schemes, regret number 5, I wish I would have...
I think there's definitely something to be said about that as well. I did get a diploma in software development and IT systems, and I think it's about picking the right thing for you at the time and in the right area. Like I'd probably avoid boot camps, but I think getting some like experience based off other people that can teach you it's about learning the core like concepts, principles of like software development. It's not about learning some specific language or framework. You want to understand like why and how to approach a problem. That's what will allow you to have a much better solid foundation. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a CS degree. While like personally, there were parts of computer science that I didn't learn on my course, which I wish I did do. So maybe some lower level language stuff. But you've got to take on what's right for you at the time. And I think, you know, having something that's fundamental, teaches you principles, concepts, is definitely the right way to go.
Would have bought Bitcoin in 2010. Had you invested $100 in Bitcoin when it was at 25 cents, you'd be worth about 25 million today. That makes me sad, but it does bring me some joy to realize that there are people out there that bought Bitcoin at that price point, only to throw away their hard drives, and are now out there searching through landfills to try to find them. Watching their suffering makes me feel a little bit better about myself. Regret number 6. I wish I would have learned lower level languages like C. Most programmers today start by learning high level languages like Python and JavaScript, and you can build an entire career programmer without ever learning anything lower than that. But that begs the question, are you a real programmer? And the answer is no. No, you are not. Luckily, though, all you have to do is learn the basics of C, which is a lot easier than you might think. You can learn it in 100 seconds or watch channels like Low-Level Learning. Either way, once you write your first segfault, you officially become a real programmer. But seriously, even if you don't need a low-level language, learning the basics of C will just make you a better programmer. I started with high-level languages like Java and PHP. However, if I could go back, I would have learned C first because it gives you such a great foundation for everything else. Regret?
Yeah, I totally, as I said, I wish that I'd learned more lower level language stuff during my educational phase. I started on C#, PHP, more higher level stuff, and definitely agree, you know, having that fundamental understanding is just going to aid your foundation. That's kind of all there is to it. You are still a proper programmer. Maybe if you just know a framework, maybe you're a bit more of a frameworker, but you know, you got to believe in yourself, right? As long as you understand the whole memory management thing, like we have abstractions for a reason. Like I agree, it's good value to understand it, but let's not go throwing labels around.
Number 7, JavaScript on the server. Personally, I don't regret JavaScript on the server at all. I use the JavaScript in the browser. I use it to build mobile apps, desktop apps, smart fridge apps. I use it for machine learning and for VR and everything in between, including on the server. And I have no regrets. JavaScript may not be the most CPU and memory efficient language on the server. It may not have true type safety, and some of its NPM packages may try to mine crypto on your server. But for me, being able to write JavaScript on the server results in much faster development and iteration, because you've got a single language across the entire tech stack. Regret number 8, grinding.
I've just never really liked the JavaScript syntax. I think that the language itself is flawed in so many ways, and I know a lot of languages are, but there's just parts of it that hurt my soul. And I understand that only, like, you know, I'm primarily a PHP developer, and I know it's only in recent times that PHP's had type safety. It's still dynamically interpreted language, but it's just fundamentally like not a great language. And TypeScript being a superset doesn't really give me any more confidence. It's kind of like saying, I mean, any is a thing, right? I don't know. I just don't like the language, but I see the benefits in having some consistency across the stack. But personally, I think like polygot's the way to go. You know, you want to have the ability to write the right things in the right language. I mean, having something that you can do all the things in, definitely good, because you can prototype, you can MVP, you can get things going. But I personally don't like the idea. I like using the right tools for the job where possible, you know.
LeetCode. Many developers dream of getting into a big tech corporation like Google, Microsoft, or Pied Piper, but to do that, you'll need to get past a technical interview, or multiple technical interviews. But the only way to get good at algorithms is to practice. Like many programmers, I've spent countless hours practicing on LeetCode, but every single time my solution is to brute force it with a hash table. In retrospect, though, I regret wasting all this time here because the pinnacle of my career has been teaching people how to center divs on YouTube. Regret number 9.
Yeah, I've never been a LeetCode kind of grinder. Maybe I'm not smart enough, but it's just I've based all my knowledge and understanding and learning in the real world, and I got a job straight out of uni and kind of cracked on learning everything that I thought. I came out of uni thinking I was big dog, right? And then you get humbled instantly, and you find out there's so much more to being a programmer than programming, and there's just a lot of value in that. So I was always pretty much occupied and somebody that enjoys more than just programming. So I spent my free time not doing programming, and yeah, I mean, I'm happy with where I've ended up, and maybe I'll make a career of teaching people how to not center divs on the internet.
I wish I would have prioritized my health earlier. Sitting on your ass in front of a computer all day is one of the least healthy activities you can do. According to science, it's right up there with obesity and smoking. If you combine this activity with high amounts of stress and a bad diet, chances are your heart's going to explode by the time you're 30. I think
I don't need that anxiety. Thank you very much.
A lot of people underestimate the dangers of this career. There's no way to avoid being in front of a computer, but there's a lot of things you can do to reduce the risk, like get a standing desk, take regular breaks, and don't consume products like Prime, which is currently being sued for having a massive amount of cancer-causing PFAs inside every bottle. In addition, when you take care of your physical health, your mental health and sharpness will also improve as a result, thus making you a better programmer. And finally, that brings us to regret number 10. I wish I never would have learned to code in the first place. I've always always found writing code very satisfying, but sometimes it feels like we're not doing anything real. Like we're just creating fake vaporware for a boss with a fake job title who needs to hit KPIs for some fake performance metrics to make some fake money for investors. I envy the scuba instructor who gets to swim with turtles all day, or the paramedic who saves lives every day. These jobs might not pay as well, but at least they feel real. I fear in my final moments, my grandchild will inquire about my life's accomplishments, and the most impressive feat I can muster is something like, well, son, back in 24, I once managed to fix a production bug while only creating 3 more bugs in the process. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.
All right. I know that's tongue in cheek, but this is the one I regret. I disagree with the most. I disagree with this take the most. I think it really depends on what you're doing, and you're in control of largely what you're doing. I think if you can get yourself into a position to use tech for good, or for social causes, or improvements in how things work in the world, you can have a real contribution. You can make a real contribution to other people's lives. There's been a number of charities and social projects I've been involved with, and big reason for this is because I want to feel that feeling of like making a change. I don't just want to make a brochure website or that's why I didn't get into game development. Ultimately, you've got to be passionate about what you do, and one of those things for me is like making applications or programs that really enhance users' experiences or make things better in the world and bring services together, bring people to services. And I think if we can all contribute at least a little bit of our time, a little bit of our energy to those sorts of social tech for good kind of causes, the world's going to be a much better place, and you're going to definitely feel fulfilled. Let me know what you think, what your biggest regrets are, and if you agree or disagree with any of these in the comments. Subscribe if you made it this far, and I'll like the video, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.